The text message that shattered everything arrived at 11:47 p.m. on a Thursday night when exhaustion had stripped away every defense Nathan Brooks had carefully built over 4 years of surviving alone. He sat on the edge of Mia's bed in their cramped two-bedroom apartment on the outskirts of Boston, watching his daughter's chest rise and fall in the particular rhythm of deep sleep that only children achieve untroubled, complete the kind of rest that had become foreign to him since Sarah died. The worn stuffed rabbit tucked under Mia's chin had been a gift from her mother 3 weeks before the delivery that had stolen her away, and Nathan had washed it so many times the fabric had gone thin in places, threatening to unravel entirely. 7 years. 7 years since he'd held Sarah's hand in that hospital room while machines beeped their final warnings and doctors used words like hemorrhage and complications and so sorry. 7 years since he'd looked down at the newborn daughter in the isolette and understood with terrible clarity that he was alone in this, that the person who was supposed to help him navigate fatherhood had been taken before she could even hold their child. The anniversary was still 2 months away, but grief didn't care about calendars. It arrived whenever it wanted, usually in the small hours when defenses were low and the apartment felt too empty despite Mia sleeping just down the hall. Nathan brushed a strand of dark hair from his daughter's forehead. She had Sarah's hair thick and unruly, impossible to tame, and stood with the practiced silence of someone who'd learned that creaking floorboards could mean another hour of soothing a wakeful child back to sleep. He pulled her door closed until just a crack remained the way she insisted, because complete darkness made her afraid, but she was too proud at 7 to admit she still needed a nightlight. The digital clock in his bedroom glowed 11:45 in accusatory red, another 18-hour day. He'd left the construction site at 6, picked Mia up from Grace's place at 6:30, made dinner while helping with homework, read 3 chapters of the astronomy book she'd become obsessed with, and finally convinced her that yes, the stars would still be there tomorrow night, and yes, Daddy would take her to the planetarium on Saturday, like he'd promised. The promises were piling up. Soccer games he'd missed because of emergency site meetings, parent-teacher conferences rescheduled 3 times. The science fair project that Grace had helped her complete because Nathan had been in Portland for a week dealing with foundation issues on the Riverside project. He was failing. Not catastrophically, Mia was fed, clothed, loved, doing well in school, but he was failing the way Sarah had made him promise not to. In those final lucid moments before the morphine took her under for the last time, she'd gripped his hand with surprising strength and made him swear he wouldn't just survive, that he'd actually live, that he'd give their daughter a life full of joy and possibility, not just the bare minimum of stability. Nathan collapsed onto his bed without bothering to change out of his work clothes, his phone clutched in his hand out of habit. This was their routine. The one ritual he'd maintained without fail since Mia was old enough to have a phone of her own, a basic model that could only call 3 numbers and receive texts. Every night, even though she was just down the hall, even though he'd already kissed her goodnight, he sent the message. It was something Sarah had started during her hospital stays in those final months, a way to tell Mia she loved her even when she couldn't be there to tuck her in. After Sarah died, Nathan had kept the tradition alive. Each morning Mia would wake to find his message waiting, a small reassurance that her remaining parent was still there, still thinking of her, still loving her across the short distance between their bedrooms. His fingers moved on autopilot muscle memory, guiding them across the screen as his eyelids grew heavy. The words came without conscious thought, worn smooth by repetition like stones in a riverbed. Good night, little artist. Daddy loves you to the stars and back. He added the moon emoji that Mia had taught him to use, hit send before his brain could fully process what his exhausted fingers had actually done, and let his eyes drift closed. The wrongness penetrated his consciousness 3 seconds later, a spike of adrenaline that jerked him fully awake. Something about the contact name at the top of the screen. Something that made his subconscious scream in alarm even as sleep tried to drag him back under. Nathan forced his eyes open and looked at his phone. The blood drained from his face so quickly he actually felt dizzy. Victoria Sinclair. Not Mia. Not his daughter's name in that familiar font he'd seen 1,000 times. Victoria Sinclair, the CEO of Sinclair and Partners, his boss's boss's boss, the woman they called the Iron Lady of Boston's construction industry, the woman who'd fired 3 project managers in the past year for missing deadlines, the woman whose approval he'd been seeking for weeks on the Riverside project. Good night, little artist. Daddy loves you to the stars and back. Delivered, 11:47 p.m. No, 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 no. Nathan sat bolt upright, fully awake now, his heart hammering against his ribs like it was trying to escape his chest entirely. He stared at the screen, willing it to be a hallucination, a nightmare, anything but reality. But there it was, undeniable, irreversible. A goodnight message meant for his 7-year-old daughter sent instead to the CEO of his company at nearly midnight on a Thursday. His finger hovered over the message, trembling. Delete. Explain. Apologize. But it was too late for deletion. The word delivered sat there like a judge's verdict, and any explanation would only make it worse. Sorry, Ms. Sinclair, that intimate message was meant for my 7-year-old daughter. Didn't exactly sound professional either. 3 dots appeared at the bottom of the screen. She was typing. Nathan's heart stopped. Actually stopped for 1 full second before resuming at double speed, a panicked rhythm that made spots dance at the edges of his vision. His palms started sweating. His mouth went dry. This was it. The end of his career at Sinclair and Partners, possibly the end of his career in Boston altogether. Word traveled fast in their industry, and the guy who sent his CEO a bedtime love message wasn't exactly the kind of reputation that opened doors. He thought about Mia sleeping peacefully down the hall, oblivious to the fact that her father had just potentially destroyed their financial security with one exhausted mistake. The apartment they lived in, small but safe in a decent school district, her dance classes, the art supplies she loved. The college fund he'd been trying to rebuild after Sarah's medical bills had decimated their savings. All of it depended on his job at Sinclair and Partners, the job he'd fought so hard to get 2 years ago when he was desperately trying to rebuild their lives after Sarah's death. The 3 dots disappeared, reappeared, disappeared again. Whatever Victoria Sinclair was typing, she was taking her time with it, choosing her words carefully, and that somehow made it worse than if she'd responded with immediate fury. Nathan closed his eyes and tried to breathe, in through the nose, out through the mouth, the way the grief counselor had taught him in those terrible months after Sarah died. It didn't help. Nothing helped when you'd just sent your CEO a message calling her little artist and telling her you loved her to the stars and back. His phone buzzed. He opened his eyes, took one more breath that did nothing to calm the hurricane in his chest, and looked. Victoria Sinclair, wrong recipient, I assume. But your daughter is lucky to have you. Nathan read it 3 times, looking for sarcasm or hidden meaning, but there was none that he could detect. 5 words of acknowledgement, 1 sentence of something that almost sounded like kindness. Classic Victoria Sinclair, revealing nothing, maintaining absolute control even in the most awkward of situations, giving him just enough rope to either hang himself or climb to safety. His fingers hovered over the keyboard. What could he possibly say? He typed and deleted 6 responses before finally settling on honesty, because at this point, what did he have to lose? Nathan Brooks. I am so sorry, Ms. Sinclair. That message was intended for my daughter. I was half asleep and selected the wrong contact. I apologize for the completely inappropriate text. It will never happen again. He hit send and immediately cringed at how formal and stiff it sounded, like a child writing an apology letter to a teacher. But what else could he say? The response came quickly this time. Victoria Sinclair. Relax, Nathan. No harm done. Your daughter is lucky to have a father who still tucks her in even via text. Sleep well. Nathan read the message 3 times, looking for any trace of mockery or professional distance, but found only an unexpected gentleness that didn't match the Victoria Sinclair he knew from quarterly presentations and strategy meetings. She'd used his first name, not Mr. Brooks, Nathan, and she'd called Mia lucky. He typed back a quick thank you, set his phone on the nightstand, and lay back down. His heart was still racing, his mind spinning through all the ways this could still go wrong tomorrow when he saw her at the office, but something about her response had diffused the immediate panic. She wasn't angry. She wasn't mocking. She was understanding. Sleep didn't come easily. He spent most of the night staring at the ceiling, alternating between cringing at the memory of what he'd done and puzzling over Victoria's unexpectedly kind response. By the time his alarm went off at 6:30, he'd convinced himself that while the incident had been mortifying, it probably wouldn't cost him his job. Probably. Morning arrived with its usual chaos. Mia wanted pancakes, but they were out of mix, so Nathan improvised with eggs and toast, while she complained that Grace made better breakfasts. He helped her into the outfit she'd chosen the night before, a purple shirt with a constellation pattern that he was 90% sure didn't match her green pants, but he'd learned to pick his battles and braided her hair the way YouTube had taught him 3 years ago, when he'd realized that simple ponytails weren't going to cut it forever. She chattered happily about the field trip to the Science Museum coming up next week, and he smiled and nodded while his mind remained stuck on the previous night's disaster. What would Victoria say when she saw him at the office? Would she mention it in front of others? Would she use it as evidence that he wasn't professional enough for the Harborview project that everyone knew was coming up for assignment? "Daddy, you're not listening." Nathan snapped back to attention. Mia was looking at him with those sea-glass green eyes that were pure Sarah, her expression carrying that uncanny perception that children developed when they'd learned to read their parents' moods out of necessity. "I am, sweetheart. The Science Museum. Dinosaurs. We're not going to see dinosaurs. We're going to the planetarium exhibit. The one about stars and planets and how to navigate by constellations like sailors used to do." "Right. Sorry, little artist. I'm just a little tired this morning." Mia studied him with the unsettling intensity of someone far older than 7. "Did you have a bad dream?" "Something like that. When I have bad dreams, you tell me they're not real and they can't hurt me." Nathan pulled her into a hug, breathing in the scent of her strawberry shampoo and the particular sweetness that was just Mia. "You're right. You're absolutely right. Bad dreams can't hurt us." He dropped her at school with 5 minutes to spare before the bell watching until she disappeared into the building with her backpack bouncing against her shoulders. Then he sat in his car in the parking lot for a full minute, giving himself a pep talk that felt increasingly desperate. It was fine. Victoria had been gracious about it. They were both professionals. They'd probably never even mention it again. The office building rose 30 stories above Boston's financial district, all glass and steel, and the kind of aggressive modernity that was supposed to inspire confidence in clients. Sinclair and Partners occupied floors 12 through 15, with the executive suites claiming the top floor like a crown. Nathan's desk was on 14 in the open plan area where junior and mid-level project managers worked in a careful choreography of collaboration and competition. He made it through the lobby, the elevator, the walk to his desk without incident. His colleague Derek Sullivan intercepted him before he could sit down, coffee in hand, eyebrows raised in that expression that meant he had gossip. Sinclair's assistant called. "She wants to see you in her office at 9. Nathan's stomach dropped through the floor. Did she say why? Derek shrugged, but there was speculation in his eyes. "You know, Victoria, she doesn't explain. She summons." Nathan glanced at his watch. He had 45 minutes to figure out how to survive a face-to-face meeting with the woman he'd accidentally sent a love message to 12 hours ago. He spent those 45 minutes pretending to review the Riverside project specifications while actually spiraling through worst-case scenarios. By the time his phone alarm reminded him it was 8:55, he'd imagined everything from awkward small talk to outright termination. The executive floor was a different world from the rest of Sinclair and Partners. All floor-to-ceiling windows, minimalist furniture, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that made you want to whisper. Victoria's corner office dominated the space, its glass walls offering a panoramic view of Boston Harbor, while simultaneously putting whoever occupied that office on display to the entire floor. Her assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Margaret, who'd been with Victoria for 8 years and knew where every body was buried, looked up as Nathan approached. "Mr. Brooks, go right in. She's expecting you." Nathan's hand was actually shaking as he knocked on the glass door frame. "Come in, Nathan." Victoria Sinclair sat behind her massive desk, backlit by the morning sun streaming through the harbor-facing windows. She was dressed in one of her signature tailored suits. This one a deep charcoal gray that somehow managed to be both severe and elegant, Her dark hair was pulled back in a flawless twist. Her makeup was minimal, but perfect. Everything about her screamed control, competence, authority. Except her eyes. As Nathan stepped into the office and she looked up from her laptop, he caught something in her expression that he'd never seen before, something that looked almost like concern. "Close the door, please." His hand fumbled with the handle. The click of the door shutting felt unnaturally loud in the quiet office. "Have a seat." Nathan sat in one of the leather chairs across from her desk, his back straight, his hands clasped in his lap to hide their trembling. This was it, the moment where she'd explained that while she appreciated his apology, the company had standards and midnight text messages to the CEO were grounds for, "I'm sorry about last night." The words came out before he could stop them, desperate and rushed. "I was exhausted, and I made a careless mistake. It was completely inappropriate, and I—" Victoria held up one hand, stopping him mid-apology. "Nathan, stop. That's not why I asked you here. It's not— No." She leaned back in her chair, and for the first time since he'd known her, Victoria Sinclair looked almost uncertain. It was such a foreign expression on her face that Nathan wasn't sure he was reading it correctly. "I asked you here because I realized something last night. I've been your CEO for 2 years and I don't actually know anything about you." "Not really. You have a daughter, Mia, I assume, based on your phone contact list." "How old is she?" "She's 7. And you're a single parent?" Nathan hesitated, unsure how personal he was supposed to get with the CEO of his company. But something about the way Victoria was looking at him, genuinely curious, not prying, made him answer honestly. "I'm a widower. My wife Sarah died 4 years ago. Complications during childbirth." Something flickered across Victoria's face. Pain, recognition, empathy. It was gone in an instant, replaced by her usual controlled expression. But Nathan had seen it. "I'm sorry. That must have been incredibly difficult." "It was." "It is." The words came out before he could stop them, more honest than he'd intended. "But we manage. She's amazing, strong and funny and so much smarter than I was at her age. She keeps me going." Victoria nodded slowly, and Nathan could practically see her processing this information, fitting it into whatever mental model she kept of her employees. "The text last night. It's a nightly routine." "Yes. I started doing it because—" He stopped, unsure how much to reveal. But Victoria's expression remained open, waiting. "Sarah used to send Mia goodnight messages from the hospital when she couldn't be home. After she died, I kept it up. Mia wakes up every morning to a message from me, even though I'm just down the hall. It's silly, probably, but—" "It's not silly." Victoria's voice was firm, almost sharp. "It's beautiful. It's a connection, a ritual. Those things matter especially for children who've experienced loss." Nathan looked at her more carefully. There was something in the way she said it, a weight to the words that suggested personal understanding rather than professional platitude. "You sound like you know something about that." Victoria's lips curved in a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "I know something about loss, yes. And I know something about rituals that keep us connected to the people we love." She stood up, moving to the window, her back to him. For a moment they sat in silence, and Nathan found himself relaxing slightly. This wasn't the Ice Queen he'd expected. This was someone else, someone real and complex and surprisingly easy to talk to. "I'm going to be direct with you, Nathan, because that's the only way I know how to be." She turned back to face him, leaning against the window frame. "You're good at your job. Very good. Your work on the Riverside project last quarter was exceptional, and the structural solutions you developed showed real strategic insight. Thank you, Ms. Sinclair." "Victoria. Please, at least when we're talking like this." She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. "I want to offer you the lead on the Harborview project." Nathan's eyes widened. The Harborview project was huge, a complete redesign and construction of affordable housing in Portland, a $40 million contract that could make or break careers. It was the kind of opportunity he'd been working toward for years. That's incredible. Thank you. I won't let you down." "I know you won't. But there's a complication." Victoria returned to her desk, pulling up something on her computer. The project requires significant client interface over the next 6 months. Meetings in Portland, possibly some site visits to other cities for research, some overnight travel, multiple trips per month. And just like that, the opportunity crystallized into an impossible choice. Nathan felt his excitement deflate like a balloon with a slow leak. "I see you're hesitating. I have Mia. I can't just—" He shook his head. "Travel isn't easy for me. My neighbor Grace helps with pickup from school sometimes, but overnight trips, I'm sorry. I know this is a huge opportunity, but my daughter has to come first." He expected disappointment, maybe frustration. What he got instead was a thoughtful nod and something that looked almost like approval. "What if we could make it work?" "I don't see how." "What if Sinclair and Partners provided childcare support?" "We have the resources, Nathan. A vetted professional caregiver for when you need to travel someone Mia could get comfortable with, who could stay at your apartment or bring her to activities. Whatever works best for your family." She pulled up a file on her screen. "I've actually been thinking about implementing a comprehensive family support program for all our employees with children. Consider this a pilot program. You'd be helping me test it." Nathan stared at her, unable to process what he was hearing. Companies didn't do this. CEOs didn't personally arrange childcare for mid-level employees. This wasn't how the world worked. You'd do that for me, for you, for Mia, and eventually for all our employees who are trying to balance demanding careers with the even more demanding job of raising children. She met his eyes. "I may not have children of my own, Nathan, but I understand that people perform their best work when they're not constantly worried about whether their family is taken care of. This is good business. It's also the right thing to do." "I don't know what to say." "Say you'll think about it. Talk to Mia about the idea of having someone help out sometimes. If you decide to accept the Harborview lead, we'll make sure you have the support you need." Victoria glanced at her computer screen. "I have a board meeting in 10 minutes. But before you go, I want to ask you something. Of course, your wife Sarah she want you to pass up opportunities because you're afraid of not being a perfect parent?" The question hit Nathan like a physical blow. He opened his mouth closed. It struggled to find words. His throat felt tight. "She'd want me to live, to build a life for Mia that's full of possibilities, to not just survive, but to actually live." "Then maybe that's what you should do." Victoria's voice was gentle. "You can be a great father and have a career you're passionate about, Nathan. They're not mutually exclusive. You just need the right support system." As Nathan left her office 10 minutes later, his mind was spinning. The entire conversation had been nothing like what he'd expected. Victoria Sinclair, the Iron Lady, the untouchable CEO, had just shown him a side of herself he never knew existed. She'd been kind, understanding, thoughtful. She'd looked at him and seen not just an employee, but a father struggling to do his best for his child. And she'd offered him a way forward that didn't require sacrificing either his career or his daughter. Back at his desk, Nathan pulled out his phone and looked at the text exchange from last night. That wrong message, that stupid, embarrassing mistake, had somehow opened a door he hadn't even known was there. His phone buzzed with a new message. "Victoria Sinclair. By the way, Mia is lucky to have you. Never doubt that." Nathan found himself smiling as he saved the message. Maybe wrong messages could lead to right places after all. The rest of the day passed in a blur of meetings and site reports, but Nathan's mind kept circling back to Victoria's offer. The Harborview project, childcare support, a chance to actually build something meaningful while still being present for Mia. It seemed too good to be true, which meant it probably was. But he couldn't shake the hope that had taken root in his chest. He picked Mia up from Grace's place at 6:30, same as always. Grace Patterson was in her early 50s, a former nurse who'd lost her own son in a car accident a decade ago, and now filled her days caring for other people's children with the kind of gentle competence that came from understanding grief intimately. "How was she today?" Grace smiled, wiping flour from her hands onto her apron. "She's been drawing, made 3 new pictures for you, and she has questions about black holes that I absolutely cannot answer, so good luck with that." Mia appeared from Grace's living room backpack, trailing behind her face, smudged with what looked like marker. "Daddy, did you know that black holes can stretch you like spaghetti? It's called spaghettification, and it's a real science word." Nathan scooped her up despite her protests that she was too big for that now. "I did not know that. Tell me more on the way home." In the car, Mia chattered about school and her friend Emma's birthday party next week, and the Constellation mobile she wanted to make for her bedroom. Nathan listened, making the appropriate responses while his mind turned over how to broach the subject of Victoria's offer. Over dinner, spaghetti, which Mia found hilarious given her earlier spaghettification discussion, he decided to just ask directly. "How would you feel about having someone new help out sometimes? Like Grace, but maybe someone who could stay overnight when Daddy has to travel for work?" Mia looked up from her plate, marinara sauce on her chin. Would Grace still come too? Grace would still come. This would be someone extra for special times. "Why do you have to travel?" Nathan took a breath. "My boss offered me a really big project. It's important work building homes for families who don't have a lot of money, but it means I'd have to go to Portland sometimes, maybe once or twice a month just for a day or two." Mia considered this with the seriousness of a judge weighing evidence. "Would the person be nice? I'd make sure of it. We'd meet them first, and if you didn't like them, I'd say no to the whole thing. You get final say. Can I think about it?" "Of course." Mia went back to her spaghetti, and Nathan thought that was the end of it. But after dinner, while he was washing dishes, and she was supposed to be brushing her teeth, she appeared in the kitchen doorway. "Mommy said something before she went to the hospital the last time." Nathan's hands stilled in the dishwater. "What did she say, sweetheart?" "She said it's okay if you find someone new someday. She said she wants you to be happy, not just sad missing her forever." The dish in Nathan's hands slipped, clattering against the sink. He turned off the water and crouched down to Mia's eye level. "You remember that you were 3. I remember some things. The important things." Mia's eyes, so much like Sarah's, held his with an intensity that made his chest ache. "I think you should do the big project, Daddy. Mommy would want you to. And I'm brave. I can handle a new person helping out." Nathan pulled her into a hug, fighting back tears. "When did you get so wise I'm 7? That's pretty old." That night, after Mia was asleep, Nathan sat at his small kitchen table and opened his laptop. He pulled up the profiles Victoria had sent 3 caregivers, all with extensive experience, stellar references, and background checks so thorough the FBI would be impressed. One of them was Grace, which made him smile. Victoria had done her homework. He drafted an email to Victoria, deleted it, started again. Finally settled on something simple. "Ms. Sinclair, I spoke with Mia. We'd like to move forward with the Harborview project. Thank you for the opportunity and the support. I won't let you down." Her response came within minutes, despite the late hour. "Victoria, please, Nathan. We're going to be working closely together, and I know you won't let me down. That's why I chose you. Sleep well. See you tomorrow." Nathan closed his laptop and looked around his small apartment, the crayon drawings taped to the walls, the stack of astronomy books on the coffee table, the photos of Sarah that he'd finally been able to display without feeling like his chest was caving in. 4 years ago he'd thought this was it. This cramped apartment, this careful life, this constant walking on the knife's edge between making ends meet and falling apart. But maybe there was more. Maybe Sarah had been right. Maybe it was possible to honor her memory not by freezing in place, but by moving forward, by building something bigger, by showing Mia that loss didn't have to be the end of the story. His phone buzzed one more time. "Victoria Sinclair. One more thing. The first Portland trip is in 3 weeks. We'll go together. I'll introduce you to the client personally. This is going to be good, Nathan? For all of us?" Nathan read the message twice, then a third time. Something about the way she'd phrased it, "for all of us," suggested this meant more to her than just a business decision. There was something personal here, something he couldn't quite identify but could sense in the spaces between her words. He saved the message, set an alarm for 6 a.m., and climbed into bed. For the first time in 4 years, he fell asleep, not to memories of what he'd lost, but to possibilities of what he might find. The 3 weeks between Victoria's offer and their first Portland trip moved with the strange duality of time under pressure days, crawling through their routine obligations, while the deadline rushed toward them like a freight train neither could stop. Nathan interviewed the 3 caregivers Victoria had vetted, bringing Mia to each meeting because her comfort mattered more than his own judgment. The first candidate was professionally competent but treated Mia like a client rather than a person. The second was warm but clearly overwhelmed by Mia's rapid-fire questions about astronomy and whether atoms could think. The third was Grace herself, who already knew that Mia preferred her sandwiches cut diagonally and needed exactly 3 bedtime stories to settle down for sleep. The choice was obvious. Grace agreed to expanded hours with the kind of quiet understanding that came from having survived her own losses and emerged determined to fill the world with whatever gentleness she could manage. She moved into Nathan's spare room the week before the Portland trip, transforming the space that had served as storage into something that felt lived in and safe. Mia adapted with the resilience of children who'd already learned that change was inevitable, but love could persist through it. She showed Grace her star charts and explained the difference between meteors and meteorites with the patient condescension of someone who knew they were dealing with an adult who hadn't yet grasped basic astronomical facts. At the office, Nathan threw himself into Harborview preparation with an intensity that bordered on obsessive. He studied Portland's housing codes, analyzed demographic data for the neighborhoods surrounding the construction site, built financial models that accounted for every possible contingency. Derek watched this transformation with the bemused concern of someone witnessing a friend develop a new and possibly unhealthy hobby. "You're going to burn out before you even get on the plane." Derek leaned against Nathan's desk, coffee in hand, eyebrows raised in that expression that meant he was about to deliver unwanted but probably accurate advice. "I need to be ready. This is the biggest project I've ever led. It's a client meeting, not a doctoral defense. Victoria wouldn't have picked you if she didn't think you could handle it." Nathan looked up from the spreadsheet that had consumed the past 2 hours. "That's exactly why I can't screw this up. She's taking a chance on me." Derek's expression shifted to something more serious, the casual concern replaced by genuine worry. "Or maybe she sees something in you that you don't see in yourself yet." Novel concept. "I know." The words landed with more weight than Derek probably intended. Nathan saved his work and closed the laptop before the temptation to dive back into the numbers could override the growing awareness that his colleague might be right. The night before the Portland trip, Nathan stood in Mia's doorway, watching her sleep, wrestling with the guilt that parenthood seemed to specialize in manufacturing. This would be his first overnight away from her since Sarah died. 2 nights in Portland. 48 hours during which his daughter would wake up in an apartment where he wasn't just down the hall, where his goodnight texts would come from 2,000 miles away instead of 2 rooms. Grace appeared beside him, her voice barely above a whisper. "She'll be fine. Kids are tougher than we give them credit for. It's not her I'm worried about." Grace smiled with the particular kindness of someone who'd navigated this terrain before. "She gets that from you. The strength, I mean. You think you're just surviving, but she sees someone who shows up every day even when it's hard. That's not nothing, Nathan." The flight to Portland departed at 6 a.m., which meant Nathan was standing outside the terminal at 5:15 with a carry-on bag and a stomach full of anxiety that had nothing to do with air travel. Victoria arrived 10 minutes later in a town car dressed in dark jeans and a cashmere sweater that somehow managed to look both casual and expensive. Her hair was down instead of pulled back, falling in waves around her shoulders, and for a moment Nathan barely recognized her as the same person who commanded boardrooms in tailored armor. "You look different." She raised an eyebrow as she pulled her own bag from the trunk. "I look human. It happens occasionally when I'm not trying to intimidate contractors." They checked in at separate kiosks. Nathan had assumed they'd be on different flights until Victoria appeared at the gate with 2 boarding passes and an expression that suggested this had been planned all along. "The company's paying either way. Might as well use the time to go over the client brief." The plane was half empty, and they claimed a row near the back where Victoria could spread out her laptop and Nathan could pretend to review documents while actually fighting the urge to check his phone for the 3rd time in 10 minutes to make sure Mia had gotten to school safely. She's fine. Victoria's voice cut through his spiraling with the precision of someone who'd watched him cycle through this anxiety twice already in the past hour. Grace texted me a photo 20 minutes ago. Mia's having breakfast and explaining something about gravitational lensing that I absolutely do not understand. She showed him her phone. The image showed Mia at their kitchen table, cereal forgotten hands gesturing wildly as she demonstrated something with a flashlight and a glass of water. Grace's caption read, "Physics lesson before 7 a.m. Send help." Nathan felt something loosen in his chest, though whether it was relief or surprise that Victoria had established a direct line of communication with his daughter's caregiver, he couldn't quite identify. "You asked Grace to send updates. I asked Grace to keep me informed so you could focus on the work instead of your phone." Enlightened self-interest. But there was something in Victoria's expression that suggested the motivation wasn't purely professional. She returned to her laptop, pulling up a presentation that outlined the Harborview project in detail: budgets, timelines, community impact assessments, and Nathan forced himself to engage with the information instead of the growing awareness that his CEO cared about his daughter's well-being in ways that extended beyond productivity metrics. The client meeting was scheduled for 2 p.m. at the office of Harborview Commons' primary investor, a man named Philip Warner, whose reputation in the affordable housing space preceded him like a title. Nathan had researched Warner obsessively over the past 3 weeks. 55 years old, widowed 2 years ago, self-made fortune in commercial real estate, that he'd pivoted toward social impact projects after his wife's death from cancer. The man's resume read like a humanitarian award catalog, but the photos Nathan found showed eyes that suggested the grief hadn't fully released its grip. Their hotel was downtown, all sleek minimalism and the kind of understated luxury that wealthy people claim to prefer because it proved they were too refined for ostentation. Victoria checked them into adjacent rooms on the 18th floor without comment, handing Nathan his key card with a reminder that they had 3 hours before the meeting and he should use at least one of them to eat something. He ordered room service and attempted to review his notes, but the words blurred together as exhaustion from the early flight caught up with preparation anxiety. At 1:15 he gave up and texted Mia even though she'd be in class. "Miss you, little artist. Hope school is good today. Love you to the stars and back." The response came immediately, which meant Grace was monitoring Mia's phone during school hours. "She's doing great. Don't worry. Focus on your meeting. We'll be here when you get home." Grace. At 1:45, Nathan met Victoria in the lobby. She'd changed into one of her business suits, the armor back in place, though her hair was still down in a concession to the informal nature of a first client meeting. They took a cab to Warner's office in silence, and Nathan tried not to think about all the ways this could go wrong. Philip Warner's office occupied the top floor of a converted warehouse in Portland's Pearl District, all exposed brick and floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the Willamette River. The man himself stood when they entered, tall, silver-haired, with the kind of weathered handsomeness that came from money and grief in equal measure. His handshake was firm without being aggressive, his smile practiced without being fake. "Ms. Sinclair, good to see you again." "Philip, thank you for making time. This is Nathan Brooks, the project lead I mentioned." Warner's attention shifted to Nathan with the focused intensity of someone conducting an evaluation. "The structural engineer who redesigned the Riverside Foundation system. I read your report. Impressive work." Nathan hadn't expected to be recognized, much less praised, before he'd said 3 words. "Thank you, Mr. Warner. I'm looking forward to bringing that same approach to Harborview." They settled into chairs around a conference table that had clearly been salvaged from somewhere historical and restored at considerable expense. Warner's assistant brought coffee that probably cost more per cup than Nathan spent on groceries in a week, and then they were alone with Portland spreading out below them like a promise or a threat depending on how the next hour went. Warner opened a leather portfolio and slid a document across the table. "Before we discuss the project details, I want to put something on the table, a different proposal." Victoria's expression didn't change, but Nathan felt her tension like a frequency only he could detect. "I'm listening." Warner's attention remained on Nathan. "You're talented, Mr. Brooks. Clearly dedicated. And from what I understand, you're also a single father raising a young daughter while managing a demanding career. That can't be easy." Nathan's chest tightened. How Warner knew about Mia was a question with an obvious answer. The man had done his research, probably the same deep background check that Nathan had run on him. "I manage. I'm sure you do. But what if you didn't have to just manage? What if you could actually build something stable?" Warner tapped the document. "I'm prepared to offer you a position with Warner Development. Senior Project Manager. Double your current salary. Based here in Portland, which means no more than 10% travel. You'd have the resources to hire your own team, set your own hours, and most importantly, you'd have the kind of stability that makes single parenthood sustainable instead of just survivable." The room went very quiet. Nathan could hear traffic from 18 floors below, the hum of the building's HVAC system, his own heartbeat accelerating toward panic or possibility, he couldn't tell which. Victoria's voice cut through the silence like a scalpel. "Philip, this is highly inappropriate." "Is it? I'm offering a talented professional an opportunity that would improve his quality of life. That seems pretty appropriate to me." Warner's expression remained pleasant, but there was steel underneath. "I've seen too many good people burn out trying to do everything. I lost my wife to an illness we might have caught earlier if either of us had been working less and living more. I'm offering Mr. Brooks a chance to avoid that mistake." Nathan found his voice, though it came out rougher than he intended. "And the condition?" Warner smiled like a professor pleased with a student's deduction. "You'd be working for me, which means you couldn't also be working for Sinclair and Partners. The position would require your full attention and loyalty. Standard non-compete clauses would apply." Victoria stood her movement sharp enough to make both men look up. "So you're poaching my project lead before the project even starts?" "Classy, Philip. I'm offering someone a better life. There's a difference." Warner's attention returned to Nathan. "I'm not asking for an answer today. Take some time. Talk to your daughter. Think about what kind of future you want to build for her. The offer stands for 72 hours. He slid a business card across the table. "My personal number. Call any time." The meeting that was supposed to last 2 hours ended after 20 minutes. Victoria walked out without another word, and Nathan followed because the alternative was staying in that office with Philip Warner's reasonable voice explaining all the ways Nathan's current life was unsustainable. They didn't speak in the elevator, didn't speak in the lobby or on the sidewalk where Victoria flagged a cab with a gesture that suggested considerable practice at summoning transportation through sheer force of will. It wasn't until they were back at the hotel standing in the hallway between their adjacent rooms that she finally turned to face him. "Are you considering it?" Her voice was carefully neutral, which somehow made the question more loaded than if she'd been angry. Nathan looked at the keycard in his hand at the door to a hotel room that cost more per night than he spent on groceries in a month at Victoria's face, where something vulnerable flickered beneath the professional mask. "I don't know. It's the money alone would change everything for Mia. College fund, better apartment, not constantly worried about whether one emergency will wipe us out financially." Victoria nodded once, sharp and final. "Then you should take it. I don't need people who are here out of obligation. That's not fair." "Fair? You think anything about this is fair?" Her control cracked just enough for Nathan to see the emotion underneath. Not anger exactly, but something closer to betrayal. "I offered you this opportunity because I trusted you, because I saw someone who understood that doing the right thing sometimes costs more than taking the easy path. But if I was wrong about that?" "You weren't wrong." The words came out harder than Nathan intended, fueled by exhaustion and confusion and the growing awareness that this conversation was about more than just a job offer. "I'm not some charity case you need to save Victoria. I'm a professional trying to make the best decision for my daughter. And yeah, Warner's offer is tempting. Of course it's tempting. But that doesn't mean—" He stopped, took a breath, tried to organize thoughts that refused to stay linear. "I need time to think. That's not unreasonable." Victoria's expression shuddered completely, the vulnerability disappearing behind professional distance. "You have 72 hours. Warner was very clear about that. Use them wisely." She swiped into her room and closed the door before Nathan could respond. He stood in the hallway for a long moment, Warner's business card in one hand and his own room key in the other, feeling like he'd just failed a test he hadn't known he was taking. Inside his room, Nathan called Grace, because talking to Mia directly would mean explaining why his voice was unsteady and he wasn't ready for that conversation yet. "How is she?" Grace's warm voice came through clearly despite the distance. "She's perfect. We made dinner together. Your kitchen may never recover from her interpretation of spaghetti sauce, and now she's working on a drawing for you. Something about constellations and how they helped sailors navigate before GPS. Can you tell her I love her and that I'll call tomorrow morning before school?" "Of course." "Nathan, are you all right?" The question almost undid him. He sat on the edge of the hotel bed and pressed his free hand against his eyes. "I don't know. Someone made me an offer today. A good offer. The kind that would solve a lot of problems. But taking it would mean walking away from someone who trusted me when she didn't have to. And I don't know if that's smart caution or if I'm just scared of making the wrong choice again." Grace was quiet for a moment. "Can I tell you something about my son before the accident?" "Of course. He was offered a scholarship to a music school across the country. Full ride, incredible opportunity. But his best friend had just been diagnosed with leukemia, and Jacob didn't want to leave during treatment. He turned down the scholarship." Nathan's throat tightened. "Grace. He died 6 months later in that car accident. Never got another chance at the music school. And for years I was angry about it, angry that he'd given up his dream for loyalty to a friend who died anyway. But then I realized something. Those 6 months, they were full of hospital visits and terrible cafeteria food and sitting beside a sick kid through chemo. And Jacob never regretted a single minute, because the choice wasn't about the outcome, it was about who he wanted to be. What are you saying? I'm saying that money and stability are important. God knows they're important. But so is being able to look at yourself in the mirror and recognize the person looking back. Only you can decide what that person looks like." After Grace hung up, Nathan sat in the growing darkness and thought about choices and consequences and the particular weight of knowing that whatever he decided would ripple through Mia's life in ways he couldn't fully predict. His phone buzzed. A text from Derek. "Heard through the grapevine that Philip Warner made you an offer. Don't be stupid. That's life-changing money for you and Mia." Another buzz. This one from Margaret, Victoria's assistant. "I don't know what happened in Portland, but she came back different. Colder. Just thought you should know." Nathan set the phone face down and tried to sleep, but rest remained elusive. At midnight, Portland time, he gave up and pulled out his laptop. He researched Warner Development Culture Employee Retention Project portfolio. Everything checked out. The man ran a tight operation with low turnover and high satisfaction ratings. People who worked for Philip Warner tended to stay for years. He researched Sinclair and Partners too, looking at it with fresh eyes. Turnover in the project management division was higher, not terrible by industry standards, but noticeable. Victoria had a reputation for being demanding, uncompromising, difficult to please. Several of the Glassdoor reviews used the word cold, but she'd also personally arranged childcare support for an employee she barely knew. She'd texted Grace for updates so Nathan wouldn't be distracted during the flight. She'd looked at him in that hallway like his choice mattered not just professionally but personally in ways that extended beyond org charts and project assignments. At 3 a.m., Nathan finally fell into restless sleep. He dreamed of Sarah, which didn't happen often anymore. In the dream, she was holding Mia as a newborn, and when she looked up, her expression was fierce. "Live, Nathan. Don't just survive, actually live. Choose the life that makes you bigger, not smaller. Promise me." He woke at 6 to gray Portland light, and the awareness that he'd already made his decision possibly had made it the moment Warner laid out his offer, and Nathan's first instinct had been to look at Victoria's face instead of the number on the contract. The hotel restaurant was nearly empty at 6:30 on a Saturday morning. Nathan ordered coffee that came in a cup the size of a small bucket and waited, knowing somehow that Victoria would appear because people driven by the same demons tended to keep the same hours. She arrived at 6:45, surprised to see him, but covering it well. She took the chair across from his without asking, ordered black coffee from a server who'd clearly been trained to materialize when needed and disappear when not. They sat in silence while the coffee arrived and the server evaporated. Nathan watched Victoria add cream and sugar with the kind of precision that suggested muscle memory rather than conscious thought. "I'm not taking Warner's offer." Her hand stilled on the sugar packet. "Why not?" "Because you saw me when I was invisible. Because you trusted me when you didn't have to. Because walking away from that just because someone else offered more money isn't who I want to be." Nathan leaned forward. "And because Mia doesn't need stability that comes from choosing the easy path over the right one. She needs to see that sometimes you take the harder road because it's the one that lets you look yourself in the mirror." Victoria set down her coffee cup with a precision that suggested she was using it to anchor herself. "Nathan, this project is going to be brutal. Late nights, impossible deadlines, client demands that make no sense. Warner's right that single parenthood and 60-hour weeks don't mix well. I know, but you offered support systems, and I'm choosing to trust that you meant it." "I meant it." Her voice was quiet but certain. "Then I'm in. All in. And whatever Warner does next, we handle it together." Victoria's expression shifted, the professional mask cracking enough to reveal something that looked like relief or gratitude or maybe both. "He's not going to make this easy. Philip doesn't like losing. What can he actually do, I don't know yet. But he's the primary investor in Harborview Commons. He has leverage. Then we'll figure it out." Nathan pulled out his phone and typed a message to Warner. "Thank you for the generous offer, but I've decided to stay with Sinclair and Partners. I appreciate your understanding." He showed Victoria the screen before sending it. She read it, nodded once, and something in her eyes suggested she was seeing him differently than she had 24 hours ago. The response from Warner came within minutes. "I respect your decision, though I think you're making a mistake. However, I should inform you that market conditions have changed. Harborview Commons will require significant timeline adjustments to remain viable. I'll be in touch with specific requirements early next week." Victoria read the message over Nathan's shoulder. And there it is. He's going to squeeze the project timeline until we either fail or I fire you for missing deliverables. Her jaw set in a way that Nathan was starting to recognize as her tell when someone had just made the mistake of underestimating her. Let him try. We'll just have to be better than he expects. They flew back to Boston that afternoon on a later flight than originally planned, using the morning to outline a strategy for handling whatever requirements Warner was about to impose. Victoria worked with the focused intensity of someone who'd been fighting battles like this her entire career, and Nathan found himself matching her energy-building contingency plans and identifying potential pressure points before Warner could exploit them. Somewhere over the Midwest, Victoria's laptop died, and she was forced to actually sit still for 20 minutes while it recharged. Nathan watched her fidget with a napkin, clearly uncomfortable with enforced idleness, and made a decision that was probably unwise but felt necessary. "Can I ask you something personal?" She looked up, wary but not dismissive. "You can ask." "I reserve the right not to answer. Why did Warner's offer make you so angry?" It wasn't just about losing a project lead. Victoria was quiet for so long Nathan thought she wouldn't respond. Then she sighed, and some of the tension left her shoulders. "My father worked 3 jobs after my mother left. He was never home. I barely knew him beyond the envelope of cash he'd leave on the kitchen counter and the notes reminding me to do my homework. When I was 26, I got my first big promotion. Called him to share the news. He had a heart attack during the phone call and died before the ambulance arrived." "God, Victoria, I'm so sorry." She shook her head. "The last conversation I ever had with my father was me telling him about a professional achievement while he was literally dying. And all I could think in that hospital was that I'd made the same choice he did, work over everything else, achievement over connection. I'd become exactly what killed him." "Is that why you built the family support program?" "Partly. Also because I know what it's like to build a career while feeling completely alone. And I wanted—" She stopped, seemed to reconsider, then continued. "I wanted to prove that you don't have to choose, that you can be excellent at your work and still have a life outside it. But when Warner offered you that deal, all I could think was that maybe I'm wrong. Maybe the stability and reduced hours really are the better choice. Maybe I'm just being selfish asking you to stay. You're not being selfish. You're offering me a chance to build something that matters while still being present for Mia. That's not the same as asking me to sacrifice her for my career." Nathan met her eyes. Warner's offer was bigger and safer and probably the smarter financial choice. But it was also someone else's vision, someone else's company, someone else's version of what my life should look like. What you're offering is harder and riskier and probably going to cost me sleep for the next 6 months. But it's mine. That's worth something. The plane hit turbulence and Victoria's hand grabbed the armrest, knuckles white. Nathan noticed she didn't release it even after the shaking stopped. They landed at Logan just after 8 p.m. Nathan's phone immediately lit up with messages, 3 from Grace with photos of Mia's completed constellation drawing, 2 from Derek asking if he'd lost his mind, 1 from Margaret saying simply, "Good." Victoria's phone showed no messages, and Nathan realized with uncomfortable clarity that while he had a daughter waiting at home and a best friend invested in his choices, Victoria was returning to an empty apartment where no one was tracking her flight or wondering when she'd arrive. "Do you want to grab dinner?" The words came out before Nathan could analyze whether they were appropriate, but Victoria's expression suggested the spontaneity had been the right call. "I should probably—" She stopped, seemed to recalculate. Yes, dinner would be good. They found a diner near the airport that served breakfast all day and had the kind of worn booths that suggested it had been feeding travelers for decades. Victoria ordered pancakes, which seemed wildly out of character until Nathan remembered that he'd only ever seen her in professional contexts where people didn't eat pancakes at 9 p.m. "Tell me about Mia." The request surprised him. "What do you want to know?" "Everything. How she's doing in school, what she likes, what makes her laugh. I've been making decisions about her care for weeks, and I barely know anything beyond the fact that she likes astronomy." So Nathan told her about Mia's obsession with black holes and her theory that atoms might be tiny solar systems with their own planets, about the way she organized her stuffed animals by constellation alignment, about how she'd announced last week that she wanted to be the first person to walk on Europa because Jupiter's moons were more interesting than Mars. Victoria listened with the same focused attention she brought to project specifications, asking questions that suggested genuine interest rather than polite conversation. "She sounds extraordinary. She's 7, and she already knows more about the universe than I'll learn in my entire life. Sometimes I wonder what Sarah would think, if she'd be proud or terrified. Both. Probably both." Victoria pushed her half-finished pancakes around the plate. "Can I tell you something I've never told anyone at work?" Nathan nodded, sensing this was the kind of moment that required silence. "I had a chance to reconcile with my mother a few years ago. She reached out, wanted to explain why she left, maybe rebuild something. And I said no, told her it was too late, that I'd built a life without her and didn't need her guilt or her excuses." "Do you regret it?" "Every day. Because maybe she was terrible. Maybe her reasons were selfish, but I'll never know now. She died last year, and I found out from her lawyer. I was so busy being right that I missed the chance to understand." Her eyes met Nathan's. "I guess what I'm saying is that choosing the hard thing doesn't always mean you're choosing the right thing. Sometimes you just have to accept that there are no perfect answers, and every choice costs something." They sat in the diner until it started emptying out for the night shift, talking about loss and choice and the particular burden of being responsible for small humans who deserved better than their parents' unresolved trauma. When they finally paid and walked back to their separate cars in the parking lot, something had shifted between them, not romance exactly, but recognition. Two people who'd survived their own disasters and emerged determined not to let the wreckage define them. Nathan drove home to find Mia asleep, but had left her constellation drawing on his pillow a detailed map of the autumn sky with careful labels in her best handwriting. In the corner, she'd drawn a small figure labeled Daddy, standing on Earth and looking up at the stars. He texted Victoria a photo. "This is what I came home to. Thank you for making sure I could." Her response came immediately. "That's what I came home to." She'd sent a photo of her empty apartment, sleek and modern and utterly impersonal, except for a single handmade cabin model visible on a shelf in the background. Nathan stared at the image, understanding suddenly that the model wasn't decoration. It was the same kind of talisman he carried, a reminder of something or someone lost that you weren't ready to forget. On Monday morning, an email arrived from Philip Warner. The subject line read, "Harborview Timeline Revision. Required Review." The attachment outlined new project requirements that compressed the original 6-month timeline to 4 months, an acceleration that would require either doubling the team size or accepting that someone was going to be effectively living at the construction site for the duration. Victoria called an emergency meeting for 2 p.m. Nathan arrived to find her already in the conference room. Warner's email projected on the wall screen like a declaration of war. "He thinks this will break us." Her voice was calm, analytical, the kind of tone military strategists probably used when discussing enemy movements. "Will it? Not if we're smarter than he expects, and luckier than we have any right to be." She pulled up a modified project plan that she'd apparently been working on since the email arrived 3 hours ago. "We split responsibilities. I handle client management, and permitting that keeps Warner's attention on me instead of you. You focus entirely on site execution and contractor coordination. We bring in Derek as your second and cross-train him so there's redundancy if either of us gets hit by a bus." "What about Mia?" "What about her? The 4-month timeline means I'm effectively living at the office or the construction site. That's not sustainable with a 7-year-old at home." Victoria closed her laptop and looked at him directly. "Then we build sustainability into the schedule. Hard stop at 6 p.m. 3 days a week for family dinner. Grace stays overnight twice a week so you can work late the other nights. Derek covers weekend site checks in rotation. And if Warner has a problem with any of that, he can take it up with me personally. You'd restructure the entire project around my parenting schedule. I'd restructure it around the reality that human beings need sleep and children need their parents. That's not accommodation, it's just basic logic." She stood gathering her materials. "Warner thinks he's testing whether you can handle the pressure. What he's actually doing is teaching us exactly how much we're willing to sacrifice. And the answer is less than he thinks." The hell month began on a Tuesday with foundation inspections that revealed hairline cracks in the northeast corner, and it didn't truly end until 16 weeks later when Nathan finally understood that survival and living were not the same thing. Warner's compressed timeline turned Harborview into a machine that consumed everything. Sleep, meals, the careful boundaries Nathan had tried to maintain between work and the life he'd promised Sarah he would actually live. The construction site became his second home, then his primary one, a place where he knew the location of every electrical conduit and load-bearing wall better than he knew the contents of his own refrigerator. Derek proved himself indispensable in ways that went beyond project management. He covered the dawn inspections when Nathan had been up until 3 a.m. reviewing structural calculations. He handled contractor disputes with the kind of diplomatic firmness that kept small disagreements from becoming project-threatening conflicts. And he occasionally forced Nathan to acknowledge that human bodies required fuel beyond coffee and whatever protein bars the vending machine hadn't run out of yet. "You're going to collapse." Derek appeared at the construction trailer at 7 p.m. on a Friday with Thai food and an expression that suggested refusal wasn't an option. "I'm fine. You've been wearing the same shirt for 2 days, and you just tried to unlock the trailer with your car keys. Eat the pad thai before I call Victoria and tell her you're neglecting basic human maintenance." The threat worked because they both knew Victoria would follow through with whatever intervention she deemed necessary, and Nathan had learned that her version of problem-solving often involved uncomfortable conversations about sustainability and whether he was actually honoring Sarah's memory or just using work as a different kind of grave to crawl into. Grace sent photos 3 times a day. Mia at breakfast. Mia after school. Mia working on the scale model of the solar system that had evolved from fruit to papier-mâché when the watermelon Jupiter started attracting flies. Each image was evidence that his daughter was thriving and proof that he was missing it. The pivot came during week 7 when Nathan woke at 4 a.m. in the construction trailer with a blueprint stuck to his face and the sudden clarity that came from exhaustion stripping away every defense. The phased construction approach had been staring at him for weeks, not building everything simultaneously, but completing clusters that could move to inspection while crews worked on the next section. Modular thinking applied to affordable housing. Simple, obvious, impossible to see when you were drowning in the assumed approach. He called Victoria despite the hour because she'd told him once that insomnia was a chronic condition and he shouldn't worry about waking her. She answered on the second ring alert in a way that suggested she hadn't been sleeping either. Tell me you've had a breakthrough and not a crisis. What if we're building this wrong? He walked her through the phased approach while pulling up modified timelines on his laptop, the words tumbling over each other as the solution crystallized from concept to actionable plan. You're suggesting we completely restructure 6 weeks into construction. I'm suggesting we build smarter instead of just faster. We can meet Warner's timeline without killing ourselves if we think about this differently. Victoria was quiet for long enough that Nathan wondered if the connection had dropped. Then her voice came through, careful and considering. Send me the revised schedule. We present to Warner Monday. After she hung up, Nathan sat in the pre-dawn darkness and felt something shift, not relief exactly, but the first breath after being underwater too long. The work still mattered. The deadline still loomed. But maybe there was a way through that didn't require sacrificing everything else on the altar of completion. The presentation to Warner happened via video conference because neither Nathan nor Victoria could justify the travel time. Warner appeared on screen looking as polished as ever, his expression revealing nothing as Nathan walked through the phased construction proposal. 20 minutes of explanation, 12 slides. Enough contingency planning to address every objection before it could be voiced. When Nathan finished, Warner leaned back in his chair with something that might have been approval or might have been calculation. This is actually brilliant. You're creating a production model that solves cash flow problems I was going to raise next month. He paused, and Nathan recognized the moment when Warner made a decision. I tested you both. I wanted to see if pressure would break you or if you'd find a way through. Most people break. You built something better than what we started with. Warner's expression shifted to something more human, less investor. I'm restoring full funding to the original timeline. You've earned it. And Mr. Brooks, I apologize for the games. My wife would have called me out for testing people instead of trusting them. After the call ended, Victoria remained on Nathan's screen from her Boston office. Take 2 days off. Go home. See Mia. The site will survive without you. I can't just abandon. You're not abandoning anything. You're remembering that the work only matters if you're still human enough to care about why you're doing it. Her voice softened. Nathan, you've been living at the construction site for 7 weeks. Your daughter deserves more than photos. But the guilt was already rising, the familiar calculus of parental failure. There's a school play, tomorrow night. She's been practicing for weeks and didn't tell me because she assumed I couldn't come. Then prove her wrong. The apartment felt like a museum of a life he'd abandoned temporarily and somehow forgotten to return to. Mia's artwork had multiplied across every vertical surface, newer pieces overlapping older ones in an archaeological record of her past 2 months. Grace had maintained order with competence that made Nathan simultaneously grateful and ashamed. Grateful for the care, ashamed that someone else had been present for all the small moments that composed his daughter's actual life. He arrived at 5:30 a.m. and found Grace already awake, unsurprised by his appearance. She's been hoping you'd make it. Didn't want to ask because she's learned to protect herself from disappointment. The words landed like a physical blow. What have I done? Grace poured coffee with the brisk efficiency of someone who'd been managing crises longer than Nathan had been alive. You've been trying to build something that matters while raising a child alone. That's not failure, it's just hard. But she needs to know she matters more than the buildings. Mia's alarm went off at 6:45. Nathan positioned himself in the hallway and waited, his heart hammering with an anxiety that had nothing to do with construction deadlines and everything to do with whether his daughter would even recognize him after 7 weeks of absence. When her door opened and she saw him standing there, her face cycled through disbelief to hope to guarded joy in the space of 3 seconds. Daddy, are you real, very real, little artist? She crashed into him with enough force to make him stumble, her arms wrapping around his waist with the desperate grip of someone who'd learned that people could disappear without warning. You came home, just for today. But I'm here now, and I heard something about a very important play featuring a very talented star. Mia pulled back her eyes wide. "Your coming really wouldn't miss it." The look on her face, joy edged with residual disbelief, would stay with Nathan for months afterward, a reminder that his daughter had learned to expect less from him, and that was a failure no professional achievement could offset. They made pancakes together, Mia chattering about school and her friend Emma and the science fair project on gravitational lensing that she absolutely needed Nathan's help with next week. He listened and responded, and tried to ignore the growing awareness that 7 weeks had contained a lifetime of moments he'd never get back. The play that evening was chaos in the best possible way, elementary school theater, where enthusiasm compensated for polish and forgotten lines became improvised solutions that somehow worked. Mia appeared in the constellation scene wearing a silver costume Grace had constructed, her arms spread wide as she delivered her lines about Polaris and navigation with the seriousness of someone who understood the stakes. Nathan recorded every second, and when Mia's scene ended and she scanned the audience and found him actually there, her smile was worth every delayed inspection and missed deadline. But the real moment came later, after ice cream and introductions to her teacher and friends when they were walking home in the autumn darkness. "Daddy, can I ask you something?" "Anything. Do you like Ms. Victoria?" The question stopped Nathan mid-stride. "She's my boss. And yes, I respect her very much." Mia's hand tightened in his. "That's not what I meant. Emma's mom has a boyfriend and they look at each other in this special way. You look at Ms. Victoria like that." Nathan crouched to his daughter's eye level under a streetlight that made her face look older than 7. "What would you think if I did like her? More than just boss and employee." Mia was quiet for a long moment, her expression serious. "Mommy told me something before she had to go to the hospital the last time. She said it was okay if you found someone new someday. She said she wanted you to be happy, not just sad missing her forever. You remember that I remember the important things." Mia's eyes. Sarah's eyes held his with an intensity that made his chest ache. "Ms. Victoria sends me photos of the construction site. She explains what's happening so I understand why your work matters. And she listens when I talk about stars like it's actually interesting instead of just being polite. Her verdict came out matter-of-fact, the way children delivered truth without performance. I think Mommy would like her. And I like her too. So if you like her more than just work, that's okay with me." Nathan pulled his daughter into a hug that was probably too tight, fighting back tears that had nothing to do with grief and everything to do with the particular grace of children who'd learned to carry loss without letting it destroy their capacity for new love. That night, after Mia was asleep, Nathan sat at his kitchen table and looked at the wedding ring he still wore. He'd put it on 7 years ago when Sarah had promised forever, and he'd kept wearing it through her death and the years after because taking it off felt like admitting she was really gone. But she was gone. And Mia was growing up. And somewhere along the way Nathan had met someone who saw him completely, the grief and the hope, the dedication and the exhaustion, the father and the professional, and hadn't run from any of it. He pulled the ring off slowly, feeling the indent it had left in his skin, like a scar that would fade but never fully disappear. Then he placed it carefully in a small wooden box alongside Sarah's favorite earrings and the hospital bracelet from the day Mia was born. Not forgotten. Never forgotten. But no longer the only story his hands could tell. The next morning Nathan returned to the construction site with renewed focus and the kind of clarity that came from remembering why the work mattered. Victoria arrived for a site visit later that week, picking her way across the construction zone in boots that were clearly new and a hard hat that sat slightly wrong on her head. "You didn't have to come all the way to Portland. I wanted to see it in person. The thing we're actually building." He guided her through the completed first cluster, explaining the phased approach and how the modular thinking had transformed the entire timeline. Victoria listened with that focused attention she brought to everything, asking questions that proved she understood both the structural details and the human implications. They stood at the edge of the site looking back at what had been built, and Nathan caught Victoria's expression and profile satisfaction mixed with something that looked like hope. "Thank you." She turned to face him. "For what?" "For the photos you send Mia. for explaining the construction in ways that help her understand why I'm gone so much, for seeing her as a person instead of just an obstacle to my productivity. Victoria's expression softened in a way Nathan had learned meant she was letting someone pass the armor. She asks good questions, better than most of my project managers, and she deserves to know that her father's work matters. You've never asked what happened with Sarah. I figured you'd tell me when you were ready. Nathan looked out at the Harborview buildings taking shape against the Portland skyline. She was fierce. That's the first thing people should know. Kind with the ferocity of someone who'd decided the world needed more light and she was going to provide it whether the world cooperated or not. She sounds extraordinary. She made me promise before she died that I'd actually live, not just survive. That I'd build a life for Mia full of possibility instead of just safety. For years I thought I was honoring that promise, but I was really just going through motions. Survival without joy. He met Victoria's eyes. You reminded me what living actually looks like. Work that matters and relationships that are real, and the courage to believe that loss doesn't have to be the end of the story. Victoria took a step closer, close enough that Nathan could see the gold flecks in her eyes he'd noticed that first morning after the wrong text message. Nathan, I need to tell you something. And I need you to listen without interrupting because if I stop, I might lose my nerve. Okay. When you turned down Warner's offer, I told myself it was just professional relief, that I was happy to keep a talented project manager. But that was a lie. She took a breath. The truth is that somewhere between your wrong text message and this moment, you became the person I think about at midnight when I can't sleep. The voice I want to hear when something goes right or wrong. The only person who's seen me be actually human in years and didn't run from it. Victoria's voice dropped to barely above a whisper. I'm falling in love with you, Nathan Brooks, and it terrifies me because everyone I've ever loved has left. But it terrifies me more to not tell you and spend the rest of my life wondering what if. Nathan's response came without hesitation. I'm already in love with you. Have been since you responded to my embarrassing text message with grace instead of judgment. Since you saw me when I was invisible. Since you made sure my daughter understood why her father's work mattered. He reached for her hand. And I'm terrified too, because I know exactly how much it costs to love someone and lose them. But Sarah was right, choosing safety over connection isn't living. It's just a different kind of death. They stood there in the autumn sun while construction continued around them, two people who'd survived their own disasters, choosing to believe that maybe there was room for something new to grow from the wreckage. Derek found them an hour later still talking, Victoria's boots covered in construction dust, and Nathan's carefully maintained professional distance, completely abandoned. The crews noticed, just so you're aware. Derek's expression was carefully neutral, but his eyes held approval. Let them notice. I'm done pretending that keeping everyone at arm's length makes me professional instead of just lonely. Victoria's voice was clear and certain. Besides, we're disclosing to HR, restructuring Nathan's reporting relationship, doing this right. She looked at Nathan. If we're doing this at all, we're doing this. That evening back in Boston, Nathan stood outside Victoria's apartment building with a folder he'd been carrying for 3 days, and the awareness that some conversations required physical presence instead of phone calls or text messages. She answered the door in jeans and a sweater, her hair down, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. I found something. In the construction trailer. You left it there after the site visit. He handed her the folder. Inside was a letter in Victoria's precise handwriting addressed to Sarah. Victoria's face went pale. You weren't supposed to see that. I don't know what I was going to do with it. Burn it, maybe. Can I read it out loud? Why would you want to? Because I think you wrote it for both of us. Nathan opened the letter and read, Dear Sarah, I never met you, but I see you everywhere. In Mia's questions about stars and black holes. In Nathan's refusal to cut corners even when he's exhausted. In the way he still talks about you without flinching, like love that ends is still love that mattered. I'm not trying to replace you. I couldn't if I wanted to. You built something too solid, a man who knows how to be present, a daughter who understands that loss and love aren't opposites. but I can honor what you built by protecting them when the work gets hard. By reminding Nathan that living fully was your last request, not a suggestion he can ignore when it gets scary. Thank you for loving him enough to make him promise not to just survive. I'll make sure he keeps that promise. And thank you for Mia, for raising her in 3 years to understand that people can leave without love ending, that stars die, but their light keeps traveling, that moving forward isn't betraying the past. If you're watching somehow, I hope you approve. I hope you see that I'm trying to add to what you started, not erase it. With gratitude and respect, Victoria. Nathan's voice broke twice while reading, but he made it through. When he looked up, Victoria was crying silently, tears tracking down her face without sound. You honor her better than I do sometimes, and she would like you, the fierceness, the refusal to be smaller than you are, the way you see people clearly and love them anyway. I'm scared, Nathan, terrified that I'll somehow damage what you and Mia have. You won't, because you understand that Mia already has a mother. Sarah didn't leave a vacancy, she left a legacy. You're not filling a role. You're just being yourself, and that's enough. They stood in her doorway until her neighbors started giving them looks, and then they moved inside and talked until midnight about fear and hope and whether it was possible to build something new without demolishing what came before. The answer, they decided, was yes, but it required honesty and patience and the courage to believe that hearts could hold multiple truths simultaneously: grief and joy, memory and possibility, yesterday's love and tomorrow's hope. 2 months later, Nathan stood in a jeweler's shop in downtown Boston with Sarah's wedding ring in a velvet box. I want to transform this into a pendant my daughter can wear when she's older. The jeweler examined the ring with professional care. Beautiful piece, simple classic. And for you, for me, nothing. The love doesn't live in the metal. It lives in what I do every day, showing up for my daughter, building homes for families who need them, choosing connection over safety. He paused. My wife made me promise to live fully before she died. Keeping that promise means letting go of symbols while holding on to everything that actually mattered. The jeweler nodded with the understanding of someone who'd probably heard 100 variations of this story. I can create a heart pendant. Delicate, timeless. Something she'll treasure. Perfect. On a Saturday morning 3 weeks later, Nathan gave Mia the pendant at breakfast. She held it like something precious and breakable, understanding immediately what it meant. This was your wedding ring, from Mommy. It was. But I don't need the ring anymore to remember her or the promises we made. Those live in here. He touched his chest. And I wanted you to have something that connects you to her, to carry her with you. Mia fastened the pendant around her neck and looked at herself in the mirror. Then she turned back to Nathan with that too wise expression she got sometimes. Daddy, can I ask you something important? Always. Are you going to marry Miss Victoria? Nathan had learned that lying to his daughter was impossible and counterproductive. I don't know yet. We're taking it slow, making sure we're building something real. Do you love her? Yes. And she loves you? Yes. Mia considered this with the seriousness of someone weighing cosmic implications. Then I think you should marry her, because Mommy said love that's real shouldn't be wasted being scared. She touched the pendant at her throat. And I think having Ms. Victoria be part of our family wouldn't replace Mommy. It would just make our family bigger. Like how Polaris won't always be the North Star, but that doesn't mean it wasn't important for all the sailors who used it to find their way home. Nathan pulled his daughter into a hug and marveled at how someone 7 years old could articulate wisdom that had taken him decades to approach. A year later, Nathan and Victoria stood in the completed Harborview Commons during the ribbon-cutting ceremony. Mia stood between them wearing her pendant and a dress she'd chosen herself because it had constellation patterns. Warner approached with champagne and something that looked like genuine approval. You built something remarkable here, both of you. We had good support. Nathan nodded at Warner. And good testing, though I could have done without the compressed timeline. Warner laughed. You needed the pressure to innovate. Comfortable people don't revolutionize construction methodologies. He raised his glass. To uncomfortable growth and the people brave enough to choose it. After the ceremony, after the speeches and the photographs and the families moving into their new homes, Nathan and Victoria and Mia sat on a bench overlooking the development. "You did it, Daddy. You built houses for people who needed them. We did it. All of us." He looked at Victoria, who was watching the families with an expression of quiet satisfaction. "What happens now?" "Now we go home, have dinner, maybe plan the next project." Victoria's hand found his. "And keep building a life that includes work and family and everything else that makes us human. Together." Mia pulled out her sketchbook and started drawing the three of them on the bench, the Harborview buildings in the background, and above it all, a single star. "That's Mommy, watching to make sure we're happy." She added herself to the drawing, then Nathan, then Victoria. Old family and new family, all together. Nathan looked at the drawing and felt something that had been tight in his chest for 7 years finally release. Not forgetting, not replacing. Just expanding, making room for new love, without diminishing old love, honoring the past by building a future that Sarah would have wanted for them. That night in his apartment, that had somehow become their apartment through gradual accumulation of Victoria's things, a toothbrush, spare clothes, books that migrated from her shelves to his, Nathan stood at the window, watching the city lights. Victoria appeared beside him, her shoulder touching his in comfortable silence. "What are you thinking about wrong messages that find the right people? Mistakes that become the best things that ever happened? How a text sent at 11:47 p.m. can change everything. Do you regret it? Any of it? Not a single second. You taught me that moving forward isn't betraying the past. It's proving the past mattered enough to build on." He turned to face her. "Sarah wanted me to live. You reminded me how. And Mia's learning that love doesn't end, it just changes form, keeps traveling like starlight even after the source is gone." Victoria kissed him, and it tasted like possibility and promise, and the particular sweetness of finding home in unexpected places. In her room, Mia slept with her pendant around her neck, and her latest drawing on the nightstand, 4 figures now standing under stars, with a caption in her careful handwriting, "My family, all of them, forever." And in the quiet spaces between one day and the next, in the ordinary magic of breakfast conversations, and construction site updates, and goodnight texts that now sometimes went to the right person and sometimes to the wrong one, but always with love. In all of that, Nathan Brooks finally understood what Sarah had meant. Living fully didn't mean forgetting what you'd lost. It meant having the courage to find what you didn't know you were looking for, and the grace to hold both stories as true, the love that ended and the love that was just beginning, the star that guided you home. And the person who reminded you that home could be more than one place, more than one moment, more than one chance at getting it right. Wrong messages didn't lead to wrong places. They led to the places you were too afraid to choose yourself until someone saw you clearly enough to make you believe you were worth the risk. And that Nathan thought as he held Victoria close and listened to his daughter breathe safely down the hall was the best kind of living there was.